following program is from NET, the National Educational Television Network.
Africans want a share in the whole of South Africa. Above all, we want equal political rights, because without them, our disabilities will be permanent. I know this sounds revolutionary to the whites in this country, because the majority of voters will be Africans.
I can see no likelihood of the white group ever being prepared voluntarily to enable other people to obtain the government and to deny them their right of political self-determination. In other words, as far as I can foresee, the whites will oppose any measure that may eventually lead to their political subservience.
At a time when white rule has ended on most of the African continent and African nationalism has emerged as the dominant force in a bloc of independent African states, the Republic of South Africa has become an isolated bastion of white nationalism. Within South Africa today, the whites have a firm hold on the government, the country's enormous wealth, and its armed might. But the opposing forces of black nationalism, while temporarily suppressed, are favored for ultimate success by their overwhelming strength of numbers within South Africa, reinforced by the sympathy of the Afro-Asian world.
In its Changing World series, the National Educational Television Network presents the second of 2 hour-long essays on South Africa. One nation, 2 nationalisms.
Here in De Wilt, a small town near Johannesburg, members of the Nationalist Party have gathered to celebrate its 50th anniversary and to listen to an address from their party leader and Prime Minister, Dr. Henry Verwoerd, arriving with his wife. In addition to his position as the principal political leader of his country, Dr. Verwoerd is the spokesman of the Afrikaners, the descendants of the early Dutch settlers who have preserved their special culture and their language. Of South Africa's 17 million population, almost 20% are white. This is by far the biggest white minority in Africa. In the past, there have been bitter rivalries, particularly between the Afrikaners and the English-speaking group. But this traditional cleavage is now nearly healed. The desperate challenge of African nationalism within the country and pressures from the rest of the continent and the world community have produced a new white solidarity.
Dit is vandaag een dag van herinnering.
Supported by an exclusively white electorate, the Nationalist Party has been in power continuously since 1948. Since then, its basic policy has been to advocate the complete separation of the races. This is the policy of apartheid. Apartheid is an Afrikaner word which literally means apartness. The parties in opposition to the government have been steadily losing ground. Today, the morale of the Nationalist Party is stronger than ever.
South Africa first. South Africa first, not only out of selfish love for South Africa alone, but because that is the feeling which must pervade the human breast of the citizen of every nation as far as his nation is concerned. We say South Africa first. We have the right to expect non-interference from the United Nations, from the Western nations, from the African nations, from the High Commission territories, from the Asiatic nations. We have the right to expect non-interference from all of them. I know we are not getting it. I know that I am enunciating a principle and a standpoint from our side which is not answered in full from the others. But that will not make us depart from our principle. And that principle must eventually triumph. Because there is no other way in which the world can have peace.
Dr. Verwoerd's principle of white rule faces the resolute opposition of the indigenous black African majority. African nationalism has been organized and active on a countrywide basis for over 50 years. Until recently, it adhered to a course of non-violent resistance, but its forces have been ruthlessly suppressed by the government. The two major African parties, the African National Congress and the Pan-Africanist Congress, have been banned. The principal leaders of these parties driven underground into exile or jail. The conflict of nationalism is brought into focus by the eminent authority on South Africa, Dr. Gwendolyn Carter, director of the African Studies program at Northwestern University, former president of the African Studies Association, and advisor to the United States State Department.
Well, what we have in South Africa is two nationalisms confronting each other. Afrikaner nationalism, the dominant group among the whites, and African nationalism, by far the dominant group among the non-whites and the largest numerical group within the country. Afrikaner nationalism is politically in control. It has many powers, many sources of power. It has built upon 300 years of existence in the southern part of the continent. It has all that time been concerned to preserve its own identity. It has been fearful of the majority group which it confronted. It has built itself a position of power in the economy and certainly in politics. And it would be fearful of losing this. It would be extremely difficult for it to yield, even with adequate guarantees of the individual positions of its members, but certainly without, one finds it very difficult to believe that it would yield its privileged position. But on the other hand is the majority position of the Africans. They do not have political power. They do not have any administrative opportunities. They have, however, had a nationalist movement of their own. It has operated on the edge of illegality ever since it was formed in 1912.
Dr. Verwoerd's government has today successfully suppressed black nationalism. It has gone on to ensure the favored position of the white minority with increasingly severe measures. Under the policy of apartheid, strict segregation and white domination are enshrined in law. Recently, the government has preferred to refer to its racial policy as separate development. Its avowed purpose is to group people according to their racial and tribal origins so that each can develop to the maximum potential. separate development would ultimately reverse the magnetic attraction of the cities to which an ever-increasing number of black Africans migrate. As a temporary solution in urban centers like Johannesburg, the government counters the force of economic integration by locating Africans in black ghettos on the fringes of the cities. From here, Africans commute to jobs in the mines, industrial plants, and other employment created by the white man's prosperity. By classifying all urban Africans as temporary migrants, the government claims it is justified in depriving them of social and political rights in the urban areas. The final solution, under separate development, is the relocation of all these black Africans in self-governing homelands. If successful, separate development would achieve the greatest involuntary transfer of peoples in modern times. The government tries to justify its plans for the Bantu people to the outside world. Bantu is the official term for black African. Minister of Information Frank Waring relates racial problems in his country to those in the United States.
May I submit to you an interesting point? You take the position in the United States, should there have been 600 million Negroes as against 180 million white people, I would say then you may have had a different approach to your problem than you have today. Well, now that is the proportion really where South Africa has the black people as against the white people. We admit that you in the United States can think in terms of one nationhood, but in South Africa we have at least 8 different nations, and the Bantu nations have got their own culture, their own concepts of civilization, their traditions, and even different languages. So that it's quite impossible to think in terms of one single nationalism. That is why we endeavor to separate the various nations and give them their opportunities in that way.
The creation of black African national homelands called Bantustans is the key to Prime Minister Verwoerd's plan for the survival of South Africa under white control. What the government intends is to take the so-called native reserves and consolidate them into 8 Bantustans with a measure of self-rule. If all the Africans were relocated on these Bantustans, almost 70% of the country's total population would be living on 13% of the land. It should be noted that the Bantustans are gerrymandered to exclude all of South Africa's known mineral deposits, big cities, and developed seaports. So far, only one Bantustan has been established, the Transkei. The Transkei is about 1/3 the size of the state of Louisiana and has a population of about 2 million people of the Xhosa tribe. It is essential to take a hard and detailed look at the Transkei because the government uses it as its most important showcase for its policy of separate development. This is a Transkei Indaba, a kind of tribal town meeting. Following tribal tradition, this man is employed to greet the assembling crowd and whip up enthusiasm for the occasion. The speaker, J. Mills, wields a great deal of power in the administration of the Transkei government as its principal white civil servant.
I
I now call upon the Guzi School Choir to render a piece of singing, but I ask them to be very short. They must not sing more than one verse.
You already have a Transkei government.
Unohulumente walamazwana.
You have a Transkei parliament.
Kwelikhaya sawubasuthi sonke.
You have a chief minister in the Transkei.
Unenkulumbuso yalamazwana.
You have your own cabinet ministers.
Unawo indedeba ezincedisana nenkulumbuso.
That come to you today to address you here at this glorious occasion.
Ezize apha namhlanje uba zikunike intetho olonwabo udibene ngalo apha namhlanje.
I am absolutely convinced that what was attained here by the people of the Transkei was attained under the leadership of the chiefs of the Transkei. You need not worry what people tell you, people who don't know the true facts about chieftainship.
Abantu abangazaziyo inyani ngobukhosi.
The fact was that it was the chiefs who came together in their councils.
Inyaniso yona into yoba iinkosi zadibana kwiqumrhu lazo.
It was the chiefs who came together in the Torial authority.
Izinkosi ezathi zadibana kwigunya lalamazwana.
And it was the chiefs that asked the government, we now feel that the time is ripe that we should have self-government in the Transkei.
Ikwazizo iinkosi ezithe zamcela urhulumente.
People regarded in the first...
Nat Nakasa is a young South African journalist who has visited the Transkei frequently and studied its problems. As a voluntary exile in the United States, he is now free to voice criticism.
The people of the Transkei did not ask for self-rule, such as has been given to them by the government. This alone is an indication that this is in fact an imposition. It is very rare that people should resist their own self-determination if it is offered to them.
The chief minister of the Transkei is Chief Kaiser Matanzima, who was interviewed in his office in the capital city, Umtata.
One feels that it is not fair for the outside world to say that the Republican government has imposed this constitution on the Transkeian people. It was the making of the Transkeian Territorial Authority, and it has been approved just as it was. In the constitution, we have been given six departments. We asked for them. The Republican government is ready to give us more departments. That depends entirely on the Transkeian people. But we feel that we must, at present, prove ourselves in these 6 departments. I am pleased to inform you that the ministers who have been elected to take charge of these departments have done very good work.
The jurisdiction which the so-called government of the Transkei has over the Transkei is limited to the rural areas. It is a rural jurisdiction. The very capital, Umtata, the seat of the supposed Transkeian government, headed by Chief Minister Kaiser Matanzima, is a white town for all practical purposes. He can't go into the hotels in that town. It's a white, they're reserved for white people. Matanzima himself is paid by the South African government. I think he's intelligent. I think he's ambitious. He believes he's playing a shrewd game. I think he hates white people enough never to want to sell out to them.
The people of the Transkei expressed their true feelings in their first election by roundly defeating the party which supports apartheid and Matanzima. But only 45 of the 109 members of the Assembly are elected by the people. The majority are chiefs appointed and paid by the South African government. Indeed, it was this rigged majority which selected Kaiser Matanzima as their chief minister. In the Transkei Legislative Assembly, white civil servants assist African ministers.
The government of South Africa, and this is the only government there really is in South Africa, retains the power, the authority to reject or nullify any legislation which the supposed government of the Transkei produces. None of the legislation that the Transkei government produces from its House of Assembly can become law without the approval of the government.
The Transkei today is a peaceful country, and I am pleased to inform you that the Transkei people have accepted the policy of separate development.
Knowledge Guzana was elected to the Legislative Assembly as a member of the party in opposition to Matanzima. Guzana disagrees with the fundamentals of the Transkei plan.
To my mind, it cannot be economically viable as a state. We feel that it is inextricably bound up with the economy of the rest of the Republic, and its development depends wholly on its close association with the rest of the Republic as part of the Republic of South Africa. There is very little wealth in the Transkei. The Transkeians will probably develop agriculturally, produce more food than they are producing at the present moment. And the irrigation scheme, which has been started in Kamata, may well assist them in that direction, but it will not be sufficient to support the people of the Transkei sufficiently to make the country economically viable.
Considering the unique importance the government attaches to the Transkei, it is doing very little to assist in its development. The Kamata irrigation scheme, with its impressive Lubisi Dam, has been internationally advertised. This scheme will assist in agricultural development, but it will not supply power for industry. Transkei industry is limited to a furniture factory and a few other small plants. Cheap labor is still the main export. Many workers commute to new factories cropping up in the white areas immediately outside the Transkei border. These factories are given many special advantages by the South African government. Among white South Africans, there are many shades of opposition to the government's separate development policy. Author Alan Paton is head of the Liberal Party, more than half of whose members are black Africans.
I don't believe there's any future for the African people whatsoever for separate development. There may be future for a few chief ministers and cabinet ministers and African officials and people of that kind. But a country like the Transkei, I can see no hope whatsoever that it will ever become a viable proposition. The life of the Transkei is inseparably bound up with the life of South Africa. The riches of the Transkei and the happiness of its people in the end are inseparably bound up. It would be like taking a poor agricultural section of the United States and giving it complete autonomy.
Nat Nakasa epitomizes the bitterness of the majority of Africans.
Dr. Verwoerd is using the Transkei to placate world feeling. His whole apartheid policy stands or falls by the success of the Transkei. The Transkei is intended to serve as an excuse for the government to do whatever it pleases with Africans who are supposedly Transkeian Africans. And each time that the government makes further inroads on their rights, it will have this delightful excuse that, after all, they've got their country.
There are some people who believe the government's plan for separate development doesn't go far enough. They advocate partitioning the country into 2 separate states. Scott Pinar, assistant editor of the newspaper Die Burger, reminds us that partitioning has frequently taken place elsewhere in the world.
A similar problem in modern times was that of the Arabs and the Jews in Palestine, and of the Hindus and Mohammedans in India. That was solved by partitioning the country, so that you have Israel and the Arab countries, and in India you have India and Pakistan. Something similar will have to be achieved in South Africa, and we've started out on that by the creation of the Transkei, which is not yet a sovereign country, but is on its way to freedom. And that pattern has to be followed throughout South Africa until we have achieved separate freedom between black and white, neither one subservient to the other.
A handful of white South Africans is actually preparing to accept the sacrifices which partition would demand of them.
The time will come in South Africa when everybody will have to do his or her own work. You know, our policy is to have the Bantustan. Now eventually the white people in their areas will have to do all the work, the professional work, the technical work, the skilled labor and the unskilled labor. These girls do the light jobs on our school grounds. But the real hard labor has been done by our teachers and the schoolboys. And we've done the work with most joyful spirit. For we believe in the dignity of work. We believe that work is a godly task to every human being.
Dr. Gwendolyn Carter sees strong reason why partition should not take place in South Africa.
I think the policy in regard to Transkei inevitably leads to thoughts of partition. The whole policy of separate development suggests this. And yet I believe it's very important to recognize that neither the Africans on one side nor the whites really want this or take it very seriously at this point. The Africans don't want a fragmented country. They believe they belong to all of South Africa and would like a share in it. And certainly the whites have this extremely integrated economic structure. So I feel that only some desperate emergency, internal or external, would create the climate of opinion in which it would be at all possible. And if it did take place, it would have to be a division not only of land area, but also of the rich resources and industrial potential of the country. A very sobering thought.
Having considered the various possibilities for separate development, ranging from the Transkei as a model Bantustan to the radical surgery of partition, it is apparent that the government is not investing nearly enough money or effort to achieve success. In all honesty, one is forced to question the sincerity of its motives. Does the government want a viable, independent Transkei, or is it merely a useful propaganda device? Beyond the question of separate development for the black African majority, the nationalist government has further complicated the country's racial problems by creating 2 other classifications of so-called non-whites, coloreds and Asians. There are over 1.5 million coloreds, people of mixed ancestry, and 500,000 Asians who are mostly Indians. The majority of the Indians live in Natal province, especially in its principal port, Durban. The first were brought in as laborers. Later, Indian shopkeepers and businessmen came on their own. Indians have been highly successful in running businesses, but racial restrictions severely limit the expansion of their enterprises.
Now I'm going to call out the names of the successful competitors in this afternoon's sports, and please expedite yourselves.
As with other non-whites, the government has been uprooting Indians from their homes and places of business. About 90% of the Indian population live in the cities. In Durban, the government plans to relocate the entire Indian community, about a third of the city's total population, in new segregated townships. The majority of the coloreds live in the Southern Cape province, where they are the dominant group. They include people of mixed European, African, and Malay descent, in some cases stemming from the earliest white settlements. The 1850s, under British rule, coloreds had the right to vote in the Cape province, but gradually, since the 1930s, most of these rights have been whittled away. Unofficially, it is still possible for a few coloreds and whites to meet socially, especially after dark. Over the years, many educated and wealthy coloreds and Asians were inclined to identify with the whites and their advanced standard of living. But by depriving the coloreds of most political and social rights, the government has been giving them common cause with the Africans. Thus one finds a growing sense of unity among all the non-white South Africans. It is in the urban areas, centered around mining and industrial enterprise, that the whole elaborate structure of apartheid and separate development breaks down. About 1/4 of the country's total population now lives in the urban cluster, which constitutes a kind of Johannesburg megalopolis.